The Mark and Helly relationship is central to the core of Severance, and it deserves to be discussed in a thoughtful and nuanced way. As someone who has made a lot, probably too many of what can be called quote-unquote ship videos over the years, it is interesting how there are some mediums, some little worlds, such as animation, where discussing things like that is perfectly normal, and yet in, say, the world of prestige drama, it's less expected or conventional. Part of that is, I suppose, because it's a bit weird, perhaps, to call it shipping or anything of that sort when you're talking about full-grown adults living in a relatively normal and mundane world. But nonetheless, relationships and good relationships matter as much, if not more so. Long-standing, firm, stable romantic connections are extremely significant and meaningful. My two favorite shows of the 2010s were The Americans and The Leftovers, two very daring, high-concept shows, deeply consumed with ideas of grief and paranoia and the existential dread of trying to make meaning out of a world that is hectic and disenchanted and deracinated and seems designed to make the process of creating meaning as difficult as possible. And yet both those shows are at their core love stories, I would say. The Americans very much is a show about marriage, more than it is about espionage, I'd even say. It's a show about two people who make sacrifices and try to communicate and resolve the differences between them in order to make the relationship between them work long term, to make that stable, nourishing bond last, because it matters, because it's worth sacrificing for. The Leftovers is not as obviously a show about love, but I would say it very much becomes that by the end. Very much a show where in the last few episodes the main character is deeply searching for the woman he loves so much who has disappeared. Disappeared for good reasons, perhaps, but he wants her back, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to be with her and to get her to open back up to him, to get Nora to open up back up to him. Severance is rather interesting because of these innately different layers of people. There is the Audi Mark and the Audi Helena, who would not have met under normal circumstances and do not appear to have a lot in common. Helena being the seemingly powerful but in reality deeply anxious and insecure daughter of the CEO, and Audi Mark being resentful, irascible, and deeply consumed with grief over losing his wife. The interactions between them are kind of awkward but interesting, and I'm interested to see what the show does with those developments as the show progresses. But the romance, the deep, intimate connection, is between Innie Mark and Innie Helena, or just Helly. These two are pushed together by circumstances they did not choose, and yet they find how deeply they care about each other, how deeply they want to be with each other. Helly is rebellious, bold, a bit vulgar, daring to a fault. Everything that Helena is not. Everything that Helena cannot allow herself to be. And any Mark who is unburdened by grief but searching for meaning finds her very appealing, and they connect. And that connection grows increasingly strong. It's a connection that's a bit strained at times. Mark cannot discern when Helena is impersonating, if you even want to call it impersonating, if it's the other side of yourself. Helly, he feels tricked by Helena, and yet at the same time, Helly feels somewhat betrayed that he couldn't tell. Both of those reactions are very genuine. But that leads to them having a stronger connection long term. Finally having sex, but more importantly, developing that deep, loving bond between them. And the severance procedure is really interesting in how it works in two seemingly different ways. On one hand, it turns people into work zombies, more or less. It creates a side of yourself that is designed only to work and to do nothing but that, and to live inside that cubicle space. It is engineering a version of the self that only works for work, for corporate labor. But at the same time, it can do something quite beautiful as well. It can unleash the unencumbered, unbowed, ungrieving, unbroken aspects of oneself. Basically, the version of oneself that one would be without the sorrows and laments of life. It's too simplistic, I think, to call this a true self, but it is this pristine, sometimes childlike, not childish, but childlike inner self. And on that deep and fundamental level, these two are able to connect in a way that would never have happened in the outside world. These are two people who would not have had anything to do with each other. Mark and Helena. They would not have spent time together, and even if they had, they would not have liked each other very much. But unburdened of all their sufferings and their laments, they can really connect. Freud talks quite thoughtfully about the process of grief and mourning and melancholia. The self is inevitably characterized by connection for Freud, which is true. These connections for Freud are the extension of the ego onto others. It is the extension of our affections, which is inevitably, for Freud, tied to our basic senses of ourselves onto other people. This is normal and natural. And it helps us know ourselves better, helps us establish our senses of self. When that bond is broken by the loss of the person, whether through death or for some other reason, that connection is withdrawn. That sense of self-definition is lost. In normal grieving for Freud, as he sees it, that affection is gradually placed onto someone else. And one is able to move forward with their lives. But for Freud, this grieving process does not always end. Sometimes it lingers, and that's what Freud calls melancholia. What we perhaps would call a deep depression. And that is when the shadow of the loss falls upon the ego. The ego, instead of being identified with the other person, is identified with that sense of loss, that sense of void and nothingness. And so the self becomes identified with this nothingness, this sense of nihilism, of emptiness, of the meaninglessness, apparently, of life. Mark experiences what Freud would absolutely call melancholia. Helly, I think, experiences too, as Helena, albeit in a bit of a different way. She has not lost one person in particular like Mark, but she lost the environment that one needs to grow to be a self-actualized, purposeful person. Instead, she is raised by what is uncharitably but not unfairly called the Kier cult. Putting aside whether it should be called a cult or not, it is nonetheless a deeply unhealthy familial dynamic. Even less healthy than what you would see on a show like Succession. It fundamentally crushes her. It turns her into a pale shadow of herself. Her authority is merely the authority of her family. She does not have a deep, independent sense of self. She does not know who she is. Instead of her ego, her basic sense of self, being identified with other loving connections, they're identified with the sense of void, the sense of vacuity and loss, and that deeply affects her. But any Helly, doesn't have to deal with that. She is free. She can say what she really feels in this honest and forthright way. So the severance process, as harsh and dehumanizing as it seems to be, and is certainly in some ways, also provides an opportunity for connection, also provides an opportunity for these two people to come together, to really get to know each other, to fall in love, to depend on each other, to truly understand that they can rely on each other and that they can rely on this connection, that whatever the challenges they face, however empty in many other ways their lives might be, stuck on this severed floor, they nonetheless have each other. They nonetheless have that connection that Outie Mark might dismiss as just childish puppy love, something adolescent compared to his actual desire for his wife. But for Helly and any Mark, that connection is all they have, and it's very meaningful to them, and they are willing to sacrifice for it, as I think the end of Season 2 very thoughtfully demonstrates. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, if you want to see more videos just like this one before anyone else. How do you think that Helly and Mark's relationship will develop, assuming that they survive to some extent in Season 3? What will happen between Outie Mark and Helena? Who knows? Take care, everyone. Adios, comrades.